Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers and hope you're enjoying your weekend. The Kentucky weather has broken all kinds of records in recent weeks. Now there's a change, and our chief meteorologist Chris Bailey will join me later. We'll talk about that, but first, our coverage of Campaign 2019 continues. Democratic candidate for Attorney General Greg Stumbo is here this morning. Stumbo held the office from 2004 to 2008 and is also a former House Speaker and a longtime member of the General Assembly from Eastern Kentucky. He has pushed his experience as a strength, while his Republican opponent has called for a new face as the state's top prosecutor. Stumbo started addressing the opioid situation early, more than a decade ago. What does he make of settlements that have been reached? And Stumbo created the now disassembled Kentucky Bureau of Investigation aimed at rooting out public corruption. He says he would reestablish that. I want to welcome Greg Stumbo back to Kentucky Newsmakers. It's been a while.
It has been a while. Thank you.
Appreciate it. So you've spent a long time on the political scene, obviously, and now a few years out of it, at least out of office. What has prompted you to want to leave private practice and once again serve as Attorney General of the Commonwealth?
Well, my wife asks me that question about every morning, I'll tell you. Bill, you mentioned it in your opening. I was the first Attorney General in the nation to file a lawsuit against a major opioid manufacturer. We sued Purdue Pharma when nobody said you could do it and that the case wouldn't hold up. And we developed a legal theory that has held up and is really the basis for all these cases that are being filed across the nation now. So I didn't get to finish that case. I was term limited out, and for the last 2 years, I've had the privilege of working with General Beshear on the opioid cases that he's filed, because our law firm, in connection with some other law firms, won the bid to help his office. So we have 9 cases pending now against other opioid distributors and manufacturers, and I want to finish those. I want to see those cases finished in Kentucky courts. I want to see those people accountable to Kentucky jurors, and I want to see the families that have been affected, like my family, have some closure from that whole episode. People, when they go to court, get closure. Win, lose, or draw. It's been my experience, because they get their day in court. And I think Kentucky families have a right to that day in court.
As you know, Republicans are saying that Kentucky did not get enough out of those settlements compared to other states like Oklahoma that got exponentially more in the settlements that were reached. Did we file too early? How did we not get as much as other states?
Well, you got to remember, at the time that General Conway settled, it was a record settlement. West Virginia had gotten $10 million. He got $24 million. And a lot of the information that's been made public now, because of all the federal court cases that are going on, was not available at that time. So, you can armchair quarterback that all day long. But I think you have to remember the timetable. One of the things that we want to do, if I'm elected, is I want to look at that case and see whether or not Purdue Pharma gave him the proper information. I have a sneaking suspicion that Purdue Pharma withheld information, which has now been made public, that we could potentially use to reopen that litigation. In court, there's a court rule that says that if you falsify discovery information, then you can actually go back and ask that settlement be set aside. So what I want to do from day one is go look at that case. I can tell you more about it when I look at the case itself.
So you think there could be a second chance at recovery of damages?
I don't believe that Purdue Pharma was forthcoming with the information which I'm sure General Conway asked for in his discovery request. If that is the case, then they fraudulently filed information with the court and are subject to having that settlement overturned.
You have made some comment that Kentucky's consumer protection laws are not adequate when it comes to the
No, I didn't say
drug
that.
companies.
Jack Conway said that. He said that our laws weren't as strong as the Oklahoma statute, which...
You disagree with that?
The case was not based upon necessarily consumer protection. The case was based on a tort theory, and the tort theory called for the alleviation of the tort that was committed, the wrong that was committed. So I don't necessarily buy into that argument.
As Kentucky grapples with this ongoing drug problem and broken families, communities with tremendous expenses and resources that are having to be laid out, and they have to make choices to do that rather than some projects they might want in their cities and towns and counties, what do we need to do to try to get hold of this?
We need a large amount of capital to begin a massive program dedicated to treatment, education, and rehabilitation. That's the only way that we're going to start down the road to recovery. And that's what I want to do with these lawsuits that we have pending now. I want to recover a large amount of money that hopefully the General Assembly will use for treatment, education, prevention, and recovery of all addictions, not just opioids, because we have about 400,000 plus Kentuckians in this state that have some sort of addiction. And we need to find a way to get them into treatment programs. Kentucky's
prison and jail population keeps climbing. Do we have too many people who are incarcerated when they should be in treatment?
We have about 85% or 90% of our incarcerated folks at both the county and the state level who relate back to a drug-related crime or a drug-related activity. They break into homes because they are addicts. You know, they get in trouble when they're high doing things. So if we address the opioid problem, if we start down that road, ultimately there will be a ripple effect that will have a positive impact on our jail population.
As you look at that jail overcrowding situation, do you favor bail reform that has been proposed that might lessen the number of nonviolent offenders being held pre-trial?
Absolutely. And people have to remember, bail is not a punishment. Bail is simply a tool that the court uses to make sure that the offender shows back up in court. We're using bail as a punishment. I was in Middlesboro talking to the jailer just the other night. He has a gentleman incarcerated for a minor drug offense that can't make $100 bail. Can't make $100 bail. And so the people of Bell County are paying for his food and while he's in jail every day, because he can't simply make $100 bail. There needs to be some sense brought to that whole situation. You know, I know the judges don't want to let him out sometimes, but bail, we have to start with the premise. Bail is not a punishment.
And so you would support a measure
I would support reasonable guidelines.
I
think we have to get the judiciary on board. You know, judges want to impose large bails sometimes because they don't want to be criticized, I think. When the perpetrators back out on the street, you know, they go out in the community and somebody says, well, so-and-so did this, and here he is back out the next day. But we have to educate the people of our state that bail is not a punishment. Bail is a tool to make sure that the person shows back up for his trial date.
And over the years, you have portrayed yourself as a hunter and a pro-gun candidate when you have run for office, and yet you are also running in these metropolitan areas where there is considerable concern about gun safety. We have had these mass shootings that have happened. There are all kinds of questions about how to move forward on that and various proposals on all sides. How do you generally feel about addressing gun safety?
Well, I've been a long-time gun advocate, as you know. I've got a 100% voting record with the NRA. But I think, like a lot of responsible gun owners, we're willing to look at a reasonable legislation that might give some relief to this situation. I know the arguments. I understand them. I do think that there needs to be some meeting of the minds in the middle. There needs to be something done. The public's crying out for something to be done. As we know, guns don't cause the crimes, the criminals cause the crimes. But I think like a lot, and I talk to a lot of responsible NRA folks, Bill. Responsible gun owners don't mind talking about and maybe even supporting some reasonable form of gun control, as long as it's not a violation of their Second Amendment rights, as long as they don't see it as being obtrusive. I didn't see, for example, I didn't see concealed carry as being a violation. You know, you have to go through a permit process. I don't see registering as being obtrusive to my ownership of guns. I don't mind. You know, if you worry about having a background check before you get a gun, you probably shouldn't have a gun.
Let's talk for a moment about immigration, an issue that certainly has looms large in the country, and it's become an issue in this race to the extent that your opponent has said that he would protect Kentucky against having sanctuary cities, this sort of thing, that immigration laws would be enforced if he's elected. Your feeling on that?
We don't have any sanctuary cities in Kentucky. That's a cheap political trick to try to scare people. We have no sanctuary cities in Kentucky. We have no immigration laws in Kentucky. Those are federal laws. The state prosecutors, when they find people who may have violated, we turn them in to the federal authorities and let the federal authorities deal with it. We did that when I was Attorney General before.
And yet local officials, mayors and others, can direct their police departments to handle immigration policies the way they want them handled.
Well, that's not necessarily the law. The law is that a mayor can't override what a state or federal law is. So, you know, I'm a strict constructionist of the law, and if some mayor were to say, well, we're not going to enforce the law, I wouldn't stand for that.
Similar issue, the marijuana possession law over in Louisville. The police department is backing off of enforcing that under a directive from the top, apparently. How do you feel about that?
Well, Mike O'Connor, the county attorney, said, I'm not going to prosecute those cases anymore. And I have a great deal of respect for Mike O'Connor. I understand what he's saying. He's probably right about what he's saying from a policy position. But quite frankly, that's not his decision to make. That's a choice for the General Assembly to make if they want to decriminalize or change the law with possession. You know, I respect him for doing that. I don't have any necessarily problem with but it's a slippery slope, you know. I mean, when do you start just deciding which laws you want to obey and which laws you don't if you're in the enforcement business? And I don't like the premise necessarily. I like the outcome, but I don't like the premise.
Is it a mixed message for the police officers when their higher ups are telling them this is our policy, but yet the state law is another?
Well, I think the proper thing to do, and I would join him before the state legislature and say, let's reform these laws, let's open them up a little bit. We've got too many low-level drug offenders in jail for possession and things like that with small amounts of marijuana. I don't have any problem doing that, but I think the legislature is the proper form to bring that to.
With Greg Stumbo, he's Democratic nominee for Attorney General. He held the office before, and he would like to hold it again. And we're coming back on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers in a moment. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. We're glad you're with us today. Democratic nominee for Kentucky Attorney General Greg Stumbo is here, and we do hope to have his Republican opponent Daniel Cameron with us here before the election as well. What's it been like for you to return to the campaign trail?
Well, the state hadn't gotten any smaller. It's still a lot of long nights, and but I enjoy the campaign trail. You know, I was at it in a long time. I enjoy seeing old friends that I hadn't seen for a while. So. Yes, it's tiring. Yes, it takes a toll on not only me but my family as well. But it's an experience that I enjoy. I enjoy being out campaigning with people.
During your tenure, you had the KBI. You established the Kentucky Bureau of Investigation. You have said you would do it again. And
we're going to do it again. And
it typically went after public corruption?
No, that was just a small part, Bill, of what they did. They went after, they were actually the chief, they confiscated more drugs. My KBI officers confiscated more illegal drugs coming into Kentucky than all the other drug enforcement officials combined. We had a room full of drugs bigger than this whole room that we're in right now that we confiscated because the legislature gave us a law that says you couldn't ship OxyContin into Kentucky from out-of-state pharmacies, which was a big source at that time without a stamp from the Kentucky Board of Pharmacy. So we got a lot of those drugs off the street. So the KBI was focused on a number of things. We solved a cold case down in Mayfield, Kentucky, of a young lady who'd been raped, murdered, and burned her body. It was a cold case that we inherited from General Chandler's office, and we solved that. Our KBI officers solved that. So the record of the Kentucky Bureau of Investigation was pretty darn good, and we need them again.
And would that require the legislature's approval to establish that?
No, we can do that. We can do that simply the way we did it before by enhancing their training opportunities, mobilizing them, and making them into a more efficient crime-fighting unit.
You have, of course, are also remembered for the merit hiring investigation of the Republican Governor Ernie Fletcher and his administration. You served the same term together there. Indictment of the sitting governor. Should you win, and should Governor Bevin win re-election, could the governor be under the same sort of microscope?
Well, we didn't go looking for that investigation. That was brought to us by a whistleblower. And no, I mean, he shouldn't have to worry about anything that we're going to do to him maliciously. We won't do that. I won't do that. But any governor who doesn't obey the law, then there's going to be consequences. I mean, Governor Fletcher, his administration had engaged in activities. The whistleblower brought us the information. We looked at it. We had no choice but to begin the investigation because it was clear that the law was probably being violated. We won't have any trouble with the Governor Bevin or Governor Beshear, either one, as long as they follow the law.
Should they know, though, that your office is there as a watchdog?
I would hope that they know that, and certainly it doesn't take a very long look back in history to know that, I believe that as part of my job is to make sure that even a governor is accountable to the law.
Have you found, when you have been on the campaign trail, have you found any resistance at that, though, the concern that if there is a governor of one party and an AG of the other, that there would be this constant fighting at the top?
Well, people ask that.
Yeah, of course.
People ask that because of, obviously, the amount of litigations that's going on between the governor and General Beshear. And I tell them, look, I worked with Governor Bevin when I was Speaker of the House. We passed a budget in 2016. We didn't fuss and fight that much over it. We had differences of policy opinions, but we didn't fuss and fight, and we enacted a budget. I don't have any qualms about working with any governor of either party as long as they obey the law. We won't have any problems at all.
Did you have anything to do with a lawsuit filed against your opponent to try to disqualify him based on relevant experience?
No, I don't know the plaintiff, and I don't know the attorneys.
Do you agree with the premise of that lawsuit, that question that it raises?
It's a very serious legal question that it raises. I knew that there was a question about his having a license. My opponent doesn't meet the qualifications of having a law license until the latter part of this month for 8 years. The Constitution requires 8 years, not of having a license, Bill, but of practicing law. So what I did was go back to the constitutional debates, which are chronicled over the state law library. And that's what we always did when I was Attorney General. If you have a constitutional question, what did the framers intend? Well, the framers debated whether to use the word licensed or practicing law. And they chose practicing law because they wanted someone that was familiar with the court system, that had actually been involved with the court system. What I didn't know was that while he was law clerking for the federal judgeship, that there's a canon of ethics which he has to abide by, which specifically says you shall not practice law while you're a law clerk. You can't. That's black letter law. I didn't make it up. I didn't write it. And if you take those 2 years away, there's no way that he can constitutionally qualify for the 8-year requirement.
Do you regret, the personal nature of how tough this race has gotten and how politics in general has come to be seen by the public out there? I mean, this is a rough race you're in right now. There's a lot of money being spent, and most of it very critical of the other candidates.
Well, politics is a dirty business anymore, and it's a shame that it is. The gloves are kind of off. You can say things that don't necessarily have the ring of truth, and that's being done. That started in Washington. It's filtered down to the states now. It's not good for our democracy. I don't know how we're going to get rid of it, but it's just a fact of life. And I trust the people of Kentucky. They know where I stand on a lot of these things. They know the experience that I bring to the office. I trust their judgment. You can walk out on the street and you can talk to 5 people and you probably get 6 different answers because one of them may not agree with themselves about, the way politics has evolved these days. But it's not something that's pleasant, but it's just part of it. And unfortunately, we have to deal with it.
Is the Democratic ticket campaigning together some?
Yes, very much so.
Will we see a lot? And is that important to you that it be seen as a ticket, or is everybody running their individual race?
Well, it's both. We run as a ticket, obviously, but we also run our individual races. We schedule our own events. We do our own fundraising. My office, Bill, is pretty much a nonpartisan type office. I tell people, when you get in trouble and you come before the Kentucky Attorney General's office, we don't ask you what party affiliation you have or even if you're registered to vote. We simply follow the law as it relates to your case. I put as many Democrats in jail as I did Republicans before, maybe more. But we didn't ask. We don't ask. The Attorney General's office needs to be independent, needs to be experienced, and needs to make sure that politics isn't the overriding concern of the decisions you make every day.
How do you think it looks for you?
I like my chances. I've liked the reception that we've gotten. I've enjoyed seeing a lot of old friends on the campaign trail, and people spontaneously come up at gas stations, at supermarkets, and on the road, pass and give you a thumbs up. My truck's got a banner on it. So I like the way it feels.
Thanks for coming. We
Thank you
appreciate
for having me.
Again, we will try to schedule the Republican candidate for Attorney General as well. We're back with meteorologist, our chief meteorologist, Chris Bailey, and we'll look at the drought and hot weather we've had. Welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers. We're glad you're here. I have been granted entry to the First Alert Weather Center. So what an honor, huh?
Yeah.
It has been a wild ride here in Kentucky with the weather over the last few weeks. We have the record high temperatures. They've been shattered. There have been new records set that may stand a long time.
Yep.
Rain has been scarce. Kentucky has had a lot of challenges because of that. WKYT Chief Meteorologist Chris Bailey has been helping guide us through all of this. So let's talk about it. We have so many records that have gone the way of history.
And see, we gave you entry hoping you would change it up a little bit, right?
Well, it's
and here
changing.
We're getting some rain, right?
Looking better.
But yeah, you look back at really the past 6 weeks of weather. It's been historic. You're coming off of the driest month in recorded history, not only for Lexington, but for the entire state of Kentucky. And just for Lexington, the records, Bill, go back to 1872.
Wow.
So you're talking about a lot of months in there.
And that's September.
And
we only had trace amounts.
We had a trace of precipitation. That was it. What's a trace? Bill, we had a few sprinkles out at the airport. October 1924 was the prior record holder, but at least in October they measured some rain at a whopping 11/100ths of an inch. We couldn't even dampen the ground in September. Now, at my house, I did a little better than that. I picked up 2/100ths of an inch. So take that, airport. Right? But, still, that's
So you're saying that, like, even in the Dust Bowl era, in the 30s, we never had a month this dry?
Never approached a month as dry as what we're seeing right now. That's what we just came out of in September. And obviously, October has been off to a dry start. But you mentioned the heat of September, too. It was the hottest September ever recorded in Lexington.
I was going to ask you about that. I mean, it was just relentless, really, the heat.
It really was.
And as a result, you had, football teams having to change up their practices, people having to make all kinds of alterations, and we've all had to run the air conditioning at a time when it used to be maybe this kind of time of year you could go without heat or air.
Well, for a lot of people, this is their favorite time of year.
Sure.
Fall. And, last year we were kind of robbed of fall because it wouldn't stop raining.
Right.
Last year was the wettest September ever recorded. So here we are a year later, and Mother Nature is saying, well, let's just go to the other extreme. I mean, we had 11 inches of rain almost last September, 0 this September. And the first 3 days of October were the hottest 3 days of any October on record. We were deep into the 90s. 97, I believe, was the top dog for a high temperature. That's the hottest temperature ever recorded in Lexington. So think of that. The first, second, and third hottest temperatures ever recorded in Lexington occurred on October 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of this year.
Isn't that amazing?
That is absolutely amazing. And again, those records back to 1872.
Was there some kind of, pattern setup that caused this that just held a long time?
Yeah, we've had a high pressure, basically a southeast ridge, it's called. It just sitting over the southeastern part of the country, didn't move. So fronts couldn't penetrate. It's like it's throwing up a big stop sign to everything moving across the country. So that stuff would get to about the Mississippi River and it'd say, okay, I'm done, because I'm hitting this high pressure, which had eaten its Wheaties. All right, it was the biggest, baddest boy on the block. So it was beating up everything that was trying to come at it. And in doing so, we couldn't get any rain. So there's a feedback mechanism. As that ground dries and dries and dries, the air heats up quicker. Dry air heats up quicker and cools down quicker, too.
So now we're beginning to see a change.
Big change.
We're looking at some rain that's coming our way, much cooler. I mean, this is a pretty dramatic shift all of a sudden,
Listen,
right?
I mean, the pattern is flipping like this.
Yeah.
So as quickly as we flipped it from wet to dry, we're doing that now. So we're going into a much colder pattern. We're going to be normal or a little below normal for the week ahead, and some much-needed rains coming later today and into Monday, too. Some areas could pick up an inch or two of rain, which would be more than we've had in the prior 2 months.
Although we have that very dry ground, I'm sure it will soak it right up.
Oh, absolutely
right?
it will. But, and, you know, we got to get an inch or two of rain about every week now to really catch up for the next month or so. But this is a pattern that for fall weather lovers, this is right up your alley. And it's going to turn a lot colder as the month goes on, too. Not just toward the climatology, but maybe colder than we should be by the end of the month.
I mean, we typically have some frost in October.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the next week to 10 days we don't have our first frost around here, or at least some patchy areas of frost. And it's a colder pattern. One of the years I've been looking at for going ahead, I won't give too much away in the fall and winter to come, but it was 1939. Bill, we were in the 90s all the way up until I believe the 11th of October, and it snowed before Halloween.
Wow.
And then we had 40 inches of snow that following winter.
You know, nothing would surprise you at this point, right?
That's the truth.
Okay, and I know you do your winter forecast next month, and maybe you'll grant us entry again, and
absolutely,
we'll get
especially
that,
since you're bringing us good rain luck.
That's right. So we'll talk about that then. But just long term, what you're saying is that we could shift and go in a different direction.
And I think we're doing that right now. And a lot of people have been saying, okay, is this a sign that we're just in for a hot, blazing fall and winter ahead? No, there's very little correlation with what goes on this time of year compared to where we're going. I mean, just think of how quickly things changed this year from incredibly wet to incredibly dry. There's no correlation between earlier this year and now.
Well, we've all lived some history the last few weeks.
We really have, and it's history. I hope we don't repeat it anytime soon. Living through it once, that's enough for me, right?
Yeah, I got you. All right, Chris Bailey, thank you, our Chief Meteorologist here at WKYT. That's Kentucky Newsmakers. Thank you for joining us. I'll see you bright and early this week on WKYT this morning. Chris is with you in the evenings and at night, and we hope you make it a good week ahead.